Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Unreal Season 2 Episode 6. It's called Casualty. So spoilers for the episode as always, and this is a Patreon sponsored review, so thank you very much to Board Now for making the pick. So obviously we had the big ending last episode, right, where Jeremy got physical in a violent way with Rachel. And this episode very much starts with the fallout to that. And I thought it was a very interesting start because I guess I thought that they wouldn't dwell on it as much as they did, which is not a complaint. I actually like how much they give this and how serious they treat it. In particular, Chet finds her still in that same truck, still wearing the same dress, just kind of crying in the morning. And she kind of toughens up quite quickly to like pretend she's okay. I mean, a lot of this episode is Rachel pretending she's okay. But, you know, she takes photos of the bruises, even though Chet tries to tell her to not go to the police because even though he's been fired, he does know about a lot of their, as he puts it, skeletons, right? Like what happened last season with the eventual death and stuff like that. Like he could put a big stain on the show and everyone who works here might be out of a job if this escalates, so it's best to kind of keep it in the family, as he puts it. And she kind of reluctantly somewhat agrees, but then still takes photographs of all of her bruises on her arm, on her neck, face, whatever, and we kind of like go from there. But I think the thing that got me in this episode is obviously we've had this rift between Quinn and Rachel, but when this has happened, it's kind of interesting to see Quinn go straight into protective mode for her. Now, she doesn't find out until a good halfway through the episode, admittedly. If anything, this episode did a lot to make me like Chet more. Because Chet, like, I was pretty vocal in season 1 that Chet was by far my least favourite character. And he didn't exactly start off this season that hot either, with all of his mystical, I'm out in the wilderness finding myself stuff. It just felt kind of weird. But given all of his faults, he does, like, again, I love that this is layered and it's not just unanimously good, right? The fact that she clearly wants to go report Jeremy, she actively says that. She says she doesn't want him to get away with it. She doesn't want to just be a silenced woman. And then he talks her out of it. That inherently is unlikable. It is a negative thing. Even though he's making points that make sense, it still feels like he's shifting to a mode where he's being protective for himself as opposed to listening to what she wants or needs. So that's unlikable. Even though he's showing genuine concern throughout the rest of the episode, where he's keeping an eye on her, he's noticing that things aren't okay, and goes out of his way to call Quinn to tell her about Rachel and say, hey, stuff happened, this is serious, you know, and he makes a little quick jab about Quinn dating the other guy for a bit, but very quickly is like, no, there's something serious going on about the kid, right? The kid being Rachel. That's what he's referred to her as a few times in the show. So I like this kind of rallying, despite the fact that everyone's kind of in this weird place. It's a very almost real thing where if there's a lot of rifts going on, if there's a lot of like heat between people, quite often if there's some kind of serious tragedy or something happens, like, you know, usually it's like a death in the family or something like that, that'll kind of make people get back together and rekindle their relationships of some kind. But seeing Chet step up and kind of look out for her, seeing Rachel basically have a breakdown when she's trying to convince Darius to do something. The whole plot is about making him go to Alabama. He has to pick one of the girls to go to their hometown, and he's adamant he's not going to pick Beth Ann because he doesn't want to go to Alabama for all the obvious reasons that he wouldn't want to go to the South. And Rachel tries to convince him the way she normally would, and it's very clear, and this is something that comes back up again later in the episode. It neatly pays off later on, but it's clear that he's kind of done with her manipulating bullshit. Like, he's starting to really pay attention to the fact that she's led him down all these different paths and maybe starting to lose trust in her. But her reaction here is to kind of have more of a breakdown and almost start crying as she's yelling at him, saying, you know, we're doing this for the show and we'll be cancelled and it'll do nothing for your thing. We'll end up in some crappy cable channel and you'll not get any your personality or public image like revived the way you want it to, blah blah blah. But she really like has a breakdown and everyone around notices. Jay's witnessing it, Chet's seeing it, some of the girls even see it and maybe even hear her say that you have to pick Beth Ann. It's a big kind of moment, and Chet kind of steps in and tries to ask if she's okay, and that's kind of what provokes him to say, okay, Quinn needs to be here. Quinn's the one that needs to like help her. Quinn needs to come in and do this. And I like that through line. I like him stepping up a little bit, but I also like that this is ultimately Quinn's friend, protege, surrogate daughter, whatever you want to call her. And ultimately, Quinn's having like a great day, despite which is ironic to say because it's the day of her father's funeral. But she took her new rich boyfriend to this funeral, I should say, and they're quite happy afterwards. They're kind of setting up plans. He's trying to impress her. It all feels very, rich person trying to woo someone else who's also not like filthy rich, but fairly comfortable. And it's all, what it is, but it feels healthier than whatever she had with Chet. But then Rachel's news comes barreling into her life, and she doesn't actually know what the problem is when she agrees to go back to set to check on what's up. But very quickly, as soon as she's found out, she's like, I'm going to rip Jeremy's balls off, right? We have to do this. We have to take care of this. She is adamant about getting stuff done. And meanwhile, through all of this, Coleman's kind of like picking up that something's weird with Rachel today, but he doesn't know what happened. She's not told him. She's chosen not to tell him. And he's like, oh, I'll come to Alabama with you. I want to be there as we set this up and do this stuff. And she tries to talk him out of it, but ultimately she kind of has to play the smile and go. It definitely feels like he's adding to her stress. Not intentionally. He's not necessarily doing anything wrong, but he doesn't know something's up. He doesn't know that something's putting this pressure on her, and he's kind of pushing for things to be normal. But even he, once he finds out, it's actually Quinn that calls him and says, Rachel needs to get back here right now. She is in no condition to be out there doing this, and she needs to, come back. And she is. She's clearly, she's biting her nails. She's looking stressful. Quinn kind of like even says that on the phone. Is this what she looks like right now? Because you don't know what she's like. You don't know what it looks like when she's going off the deep end or when she's losing control. And sure enough, like throughout the episode, like I think I really like that, because I think early on in the episode, I think I was assuming that this was going to be what breaks the relationship between Coleman and Rachel, right? There was going to be a divide here because he was going to be like butthurt that he wasn't told, or he was going to be butthurt for, the way it's played out and her kind of lying to him. I kind of appreciate that. Obviously, while I think that ultimately it is going to fall apart, it doesn't happen this episode. And ultimately, he's mad at Jeremy, of course, for what Jeremy did. Everyone's very much treating this as him getting abusive, right? Which, he did, right? That's not unfair. I think I like that everyone kind of acts like an adult. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. In a show where people are being so manipulative all the time, it kind of felt heartwarming that every character, regardless of their alignment with the show and alignment with what who's trying to gain power from who, it felt like everyone actually cared about what happened to Rachel once they found out, and reacted in different ways, but all seemed to want to do something about it. All wanted to take care of it and not put her in a position to mess up. And of course, throughout all this, she ends up going into overdrive, in producer mode, where she sets up a scenario that will create drama, because they're kind of worried that they're expecting the whole visit to Alabama to be tense because Darius is a black man, this is an Alabama family. They're expecting, because of her views and her wearing that bikini with the flag on it and all that the family's going to have tension with them. But they're kind of disappointed, even though on a human level it's quite nice that when he shows up, they're all very receptive. They're happy to meet him. They seem like very pleasant people, despite expectations. And they want to welcome him. They've made food for it. It's all very pleasant. And Rachel starts freaking out about how this is dull and we need something to spice it up. And then out of nowhere, she gets like a miracle, effectively, where Beth Ann comes over and reveals that she's taken a pregnancy test and that she is pregnant from before the show starting. She's been with someone, probably her ex-boyfriend, although that gets called into question a little bit in the actual blow-up that happens, because Rachel not only convinces Beth Ann to reveal to Darius and her parents during their big outdoor feast that night that she's pregnant, she arranges for this ex-boyfriend, who conveniently lives a couple of streets away, to show up, and even gets him an engagement ring for her so he can propose in front of everyone. To completely, just create a whirlwind where, bad things are going to happen. And we've seen, like, smaller versions of this, arguably, right? I mean, if anything, the thing this reminds me of most in the show is last season. Forgive me for not remembering the character who eventually jumped off the roof, but the 40-something woman, and they had the abusive ex show up for a dramatic moment, and it was like probably the meanest, most like evil thing they had done on the show up to that point, and arguably for the most of this season, even still one of the most heinous things they've done. It reminded me of that, and that obviously ended in tragedy, right? And there was obviously a lot of question of guilt of who's responsible for this. Is Rachel blaming herself? And it's not unjust that she should blame herself a little bit. It's very interesting that she sets this up, and it does almost like, there's the moment where the dad pulls out a shotgun on the ex-boyfriend, and then even like accidentally points it at Darius for a second, and it's like, oh, this very quickly escalated into someone could have gotten shot here. Someone could have been killed because of the situation that she orchestrated without any care for the human beings involved. It was all just about the drama on the screen. It was all just about creating as much drama as possible. And it's almost like, in trying to ignore her own humanity and what she's going through, she's ignoring the humanity of everyone else as well. And they're all just fodder to try and be the most like best producers they can be, because it's something to focus on. It's something to hide or help ignore what she's actually feeling or going through. So, you could argue that this is like, this is what she has instead of like alcohol to numb her pain kind of thing, where she's addicted to this and it goes too far when she feels sad, and very sad in this case. So, yeah, I mean, that whole thing, the way it plays out, I mean, it doesn't really matter to us all that much, but there's a whole moment here when the ex-boyfriend says, "Is that my baby?" And she says, "I don't know." And the dad's like, wait, how many people could it be? Like, how many potential fathers is there? And it kind of, that makes it all sadder, and she's crying. Everyone's kind of freaking out. And this definitely feels like, Darius is really seeing kind of just the carnage in Rachel's wake when she sets things up. Like, this was the worst possible time, as far as her relationship to Darius goes, this was the worst possible time to pull this extreme bullshit. Because by the end of the episode, after he's had his, goodbye to Beth Ann and sends her home and says it took, guts to admit everything and be honest about everything and all that. So, I respect you, but I can't keep you around. But you know what? I'll pay for your kid's college. Right? I'll put like a little trust fund aside, and that'll be for you, right? So he does like a sweet thing to be a good guy. It doesn't just feel like a PR stunt either. It kind of, he feels like a decent enough person. But he blows up at Rachel right after and says that he's done with her. He doesn't care what she thinks, doesn't care what she's going to say, advice-wise. He's sick with her bullshit and wants nothing to do with her. And kind of brings up, I get rid of my cousin because of you. I had to, get some invasive medical stuff because of you. I did all this stuff because of you. You're the root devil of all this. And it was kind of like what I was saying last episode about at the ending when Jeremy did get violent. He is in the wrong. He obviously is being abusive, but there is that moment after of her contemplating of like she kind of like concocted a lot of these scenarios to get to this point. Doesn't justify anything he's doing, of course. He is still a bastard for this, and Quinn makes it very clear how she feels about that, and grabs his junk and hurts him and says, "Next time I'm ripping them off." He does try to argue that what Rachel's like, she's tried to steal your show from you. He tries to use some truth to kind of back up that he was in some way justified, and nothing justifies it, to be clear. Which is kind of what's so interesting about the morals and ethics of the storyline that we're actually in on the show. And I think it's best represented to when we get the scene where everyone's back at the studio, and Rachel wants to talk to Quinn, but Coleman says, "No, let's all have a chat, the four of us, the fourth being Chet." And they kick everyone else out of the control room, and they sit down and have a conversation, which I think is very, very interesting to me, and very much points out what this show is best at, which is giving us scenarios and characters who, it's more complex than just a straight up right or wrong. It's very successfully created some sort of levels of shades of grey. And what I mean by that is that Coleman right? Because basically, Chet and Quinn are basically sit down and say, oh, we've already agreed not to involve the police, because Coleman just kind of throws that out there. There's procedures for this. We have to contact HR, we have to contact the authorities, we have to report all this. He wants to go through the charade. He wants to go through the whole process of everything. Well-intentioned, seemingly, right? He isn't, like, to his credit, like, I think a more toxic asshole would be like, I'm going to go fight Jeremy. He doesn't say that. He wants to go through the process, which is fair enough. And Chet chimes in and says, no, we already agreed we'd keep the police out of it and deal with this in-house. And he's been fired. And Quinn kind of chimes in and effectively agrees with what Chet said. I mean, not that she's like buddy-buddy with him at this point in time, of course, but, effectively agrees and takes his side. And then Coleman turns and says, well, really, that's not for you two to decide, or me to decide for that matter. This is Rachel's decision, and turns. And there's a moment of quiet tension. We pause for a little bit. And Rachel eventually says, after looking at Quinn and Chet, says, no, I don't want to report it. Let's keep it between us. And, the next scene when we move on, she actually, like, deletes all of her photos of the bruises she took, right? She actually gets rid of her evidence. She's made this choice. And I think what I like about this scene, right? One, it's well acted and it's very tense, and the drama of, like, Rachel making her decision. I mean, Coleman standing up and saying this is her choice might be the most likable thing he's done. Perhaps just because, even though he's not been like a monster in the show, there has always been this kind of like, is he just this like asshole go-getter who's speaking a kind game, but maybe Quinn's right. Maybe he's going to ditch Rachel the second that something bigger or better comes along, or he's this is just a fling or a little flirtation for him that he'll get bored of and move on. Maybe Quinn's right about that. And she may still be right about that to some extent. We really don't know. But him saying this is her choice felt like he was standing up for something that was just adamantly right. And it was easy to sort of get behind that. And despite the fact that I said that Quinn and Chet both come across as quite heartwarming in this episode, because they both care so much about Rachel and they both want to step up and make sure she's okay, make sure they look after her in this time, they're also doing it under this guise of, yes, but we also don't want her to report this because it'll affect the show and all of us badly. Which inherently, while there's a logic to it, well, it's not like their reasons are terrible and their reasons don't make sense. You can understand what they're getting at and the points they're making. It still inherently feels a little bit selfish, right? But understandably so, but still selfish. So I think what's really interesting about this sequence is that the moment Rachel says, no, I want to keep it quiet, it feels like those two won, and it doesn't feel good that they won. Even though most of this episode I was like quite touched by how much Quinn cares, even though she's hated her for the last several episodes. There's an interesting layered dynamic to it. It's not just a simple yes versus wrong or yes versus no, right versus wrong. I mixed my words up. Like it's got a bit more going there. And I think that this is the complexity of the human drama that elevates the show beyond just being kind of what it is. It's that, and then of course all the satirical elements of like what these people do to manipulate the contestants and all that, right? That's kind of the whiz-bang action of the show. And then the real drama, the real complexity is when we find ourselves in a situation like this where everyone kind of has a point and it's difficult to see any of them as being outright the bad guys in the scene, but arguably, Quinn and Chet at least here are kind of promoting a bad decision, at least in a vacuum sense. And maybe Rachel just agrees with them. Maybe she's just convinced that this is the correct move. But it does. So it comes back to that whole thing: is Quinn and Rachel's relationship a good thing for them, and specifically Rachel? That's been a question since season 1. This idea of like she gives her good advice, she looks out for her, but she also manipulates and arguably uses her in certain ways. She gives her a sense of power, but then takes it away. Is it a healthy relationship? And I think this episode perfectly encapsulates that question, because she does care. She wants to step in and be the mum, the big sister, whatever you want to call it. She gets in Jeremy's face and and basically challenges him to punch her so that she can fight back. It feels very great and empowering in those moments, and you really want to root for her. but then she's also convincing her to keep this quiet. And that feels like the more negative side to this relationship. And that's something that's even brought up. The therapist lady comes in and basically tells Quinn not to screw up this new boyfriend she's got because it might be her last chance at happiness because she's lonely. And the reason why she's like so attached to Rachel is probably because she sees a lot of herself in her and or whatever. And you know, I think that's definitely part of it. One of the things that I think I said in the reviews, if I certainly was thinking it when she was telling Rachel, oh, Coleman's just your Chet. He's going to abandon you just like Chet abandoned me, or he's going to manipulate you and use you just the way Chet did to me. You're not going to be this important person to him the way you think you are. And she might be right in the long run. It's difficult to know just now. But I think there's an element of she's just assuming that's going to be the case because it's almost like more comforting to Quinn that Rachel's going to make the exact same mistakes and can't possibly fathom that Rachel might have gotten lucky and found someone that is going to work for her and it will be long lasting. There's almost like a projection happening where, well, of course it's going to happen to you because it happened to me, even if that's maybe not true. And again, she might be proved right, ultimately. It's hard to tell. This episode ends with Coleman and Rachel feeling like they're bonded a bit more than ever. He apologizes and whatever. They make amends and things get sexy as it's going to the ending. And the ending, of course, worth mentioning, the cliffhanger is that our boy from last season is back, whose name I am forgetting. Oh God, we talked about him all season. David? Was it David? I think it was David. Anyway, he has a very different haircut, right? He comes up, he's got like a kind of longer blonde hair now. Not like super long, but like, it's a bit shaggier than it was before. So I don't know what he's here for, who called him in. Probably Quinn. This feels like a Quinn tactic to me, but we'll find out. Elsewhere in the episode, whilst everyone's away to Alabama, Jay and Madison decide to try and make use of the girls that have been left behind because Madison's a little bit miffed that Beth Ann was her girl and now she's lost her to Rachel. So they're like, hey, let's do something with these girls to try and make them, more entertaining for TV. Like, let's spice things up. Let's try and get something out of them to keep them around longer. And they basically get them sitting around. There's 4 girls left back here, right? There's 5 including Beth Ann. She's gone by the end of the episode. These 4 girls sit down and they're basically with the therapist who is doing one of her segments, but she's doing a whole thing where we pass around a mirror and we say to ourselves why we think that Darius never picked us. Oh, it was Adam. The guy last season was Adam. It popped out in my head. It was Adam. Stop writing in the comments. I remembered it's Adam. Anyway. So yeah, they're basically just sitting saying, why do we think that Darius didn't pick us? They picked Beth, and obviously he picked Beth Ann because he was told to, right? There's not really any deep-seated things here. But the whole idea is that because they're drinking a little bit, which they're intentionally doing, is to try and get them to kind of open up, maybe even have a fight or something. And sure enough, like some of the things they say rub the others the wrong way. One says, oh, I think he's intimidated by my family. And then the other's like, wait, so you're saying our like poor families aren't intimidating? Or, like it goes back and forth a little bit. The big thing that comes out, though, is that the one whose dad's like the big NFL guy, what's her name, Tiffany, she basically is forced to reveal or admit that she had sex with Darius's cousin, and they all kind of get judgy about it, and this leads to Chet coming in afterwards and trying to make a deal with her, and she's pretty pissed at him because it was his advice that led to that in the first place. But he's like, hey, I want to kind of diversify and get into maybe some football stuff. You introduce me to your dad and I'll make sure you get to the final 2 and I'll do anything I can to help you win. But I can guarantee you get into the final 2 and I'll put you in Darius's bedroom so that when he gets back you can have a one-on-one with him, that kind of thing. And I did like Darius's reaction to this when he gets back, because he sees her on the bed and he's like, oh God, this never stops. Like, he's just sick of the games. Like, he's just sick of all this stuff now. Which further leads to his blow up at Rachel when all things get said and done. So no, I thought this was a good little B plot. I think sometimes this show jumps around a lot of characters. I like how focused this one felt. Everything, like, outside of this B plot with them sitting around, and it was just like a nice way to keep these characters involved and get a little bit out of them. almost everything else in the episode was feeding into the main Rachel plot, the trauma that she's just went through and the denial she's having with it and refusing to admit that she needs any help, thinking she's okay, and she's blowing up and all the rest of it. It's a whole thing. So like all of that stuff is good. There's a couple of good cinematography moments, like when Coleman tries to say that they're going to go back and not stay for the shoot. Rachel kind of loses her shit and kind of like turns it around at the end and puts on the fake smile and says, come on, let's go make TV magic. And Coleman's left standing there in the same way that someone who realizes that they've failed to help someone who's an addict to something and just kind of feeling kind of like helpless and useless, like, oh God, like I don't know if I can help her. And that's kind of what the final shot of that scene felt like to me. But regardless, I think that through line throughout the episode, that Rachel's went through this thing and everyone is being very like sympathetic to her, but it doesn't stop some of the own sort of selfish motives from still being there at a certain point. And that's an interesting dynamic because it's like, okay, I can feel good about these characters wanting to help, but then also feel mixed and complicated because of some of the other decisions they're making in relation to it. And that's kind of neat. Also, Quinn does phone up the rich boyfriend and make some plans with him. So just worth pointing that out as well. So that was the episode. It was very, very focused in the Rachel stuff. And I think it arguably is the strongest rating the show has had this season. So yeah, cool. Excited to see where they go with this stuff next. And with Adam showing up at the end, I mean, obviously that'll make some wild stuff. I mean, I if it is Quinn's doing, then I'm like, why specifically? Does she think that he'll help? Or, and this is probably the best guess, she's trying to break up Rachel and Coleman by introducing the ex-boyfriend from last season. I mean, maybe boyfriend's a bit of a strong word given their fling, their affair that they were kind of having in secret towards the end of the season, but that's what it feels like. It feels like Quinn playing some chess to try and get rid of Coleman and like damage that relationship. Maybe she'll win, and that and that comes back around to even if she has good intentions with this. If she genuinely thinks this is what's best for Rachel, it's still manipulative as shit, and it still should be Rachel's choice. So again, you have that dichotomy of good intentions perhaps, but kind of evil in the way it's been done. So yeah. Anyway, well, we'll find out next time. But let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments. Like, subscribe, all that usual stuff. Helps out a bunch if you do. And of course, if you want to support everything, you can do that over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV or via YouTube membership. So thanks to everyone who already does. I'll see you guys next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?